of you and say how great it is to see this turnout in honor of our wonderful friend and colleague and faculty member, Paulette. Paul tells me remarkably that this is the first book party he's ever been given, and this is a man who's written 26 books. So I imagine this was really old hat to him, but it turns out not to be. He described himself earlier to me today as a book party virgin. So it's great that for his first coming out, he has such a great audience. So before I talk a little bit about Paul, I want to thank our colleagues here at 19 Washington Square North, Hillary Ballin, who is also a faculty member at Wagner, Carrie Barrett, Carol Gardner, and our own Michaela Holden, Gabe Brodbar, and Clara Janis, all of whom worked to put this together. So Wagner's aspiration as a school is to have faculty who change the way people think about important issues of the day. And what's extraordinary about Paulette is that he does it, and he does it again, and he keeps doing it. So in 1999, he wrote a book called The New Public Service, where he challenged the conventional wisdom, which is, of course, his favorite thing to do, that held that a public service career was all about working in government in one job for 30-some years. And he made the point that, which is very much a point that Wagner's about, that public service happens in many sectors and in many roles. And then in 2008, he wrote a book called A Government Ill Executed, and he changed the way that we think about how government should work and what it takes for government to work. And if you read his Washington Post columns, Light on Leadership, he continues to do that in very provocative ways. And that work, the 2008 book, A Government Ill Executed, led directly to funding for this Campaign for High Performance, which is chaired by former Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker. And then Paul, continuing to challenge the current wisdom, decided to tackle social entrepreneurship. And he has changed his own mind about the way social entrepreneurship works, and also, of course, changed our minds in the process. So he's going to talk about the book, Driving Social Change, How to Solve the World's Toughest Problems, in just a moment. But his career has spanned sectors himself. I first met him when he was at the Humphrey School. He then went to the Pew Trust, went to Brookings, and came to Wagner. And he came to Wagner around the same time, just as I thought about being dean, I was able to persuade him to come to Wagner. And everyone told me that he's the kind of guy that doesn't stick around, right? That I might get him for a year or two, but he would never stay. And so it is, and he gets offers all the time, and he still stays. And so it is, I feel incredibly privileged to have him as a colleague, to have him as a friend. And I want to tell you a story about Daniel Moynihan. Now, I started my morning with Mitchell Moss, another faculty member at Wagner, and there were a couple of people there who were quoting Daniel Patrick Moynihan, because we were talking about transportation, and Moynihan was responsible for authorizing transportation bills, and there were people there who had worked for him, and there were a lot of Moynihan stories in the room. And I have a quote for you from former Senator Moynihan about Paul. Of course, Senator Moynihan is no longer with us. But this is what he said about Paul's books on public management. They're wonderfully explanatory and equally unsettling. No regime lasts long enough for anything to be learned from it. Little wonder the citizenry despair. But there is hope, and it resides in the work of this inspired activist and analyst. And so before I have to leave, because I have to go teach, I am delighted to be able to introduce to you an inspired activist and analyst, a good friend and wonderful colleague, Paulette.
Well, I know everybody here pretty much. I've taught some of you, and I hope I didn't do too much harm, you know. And I've got some great friends. I mean, Bob Katzman, Judge Robert Katzman, is the one who introduced me to Senator Moynihan, and, you know, I think you may have written that quote. It's possible. No, he didn't. You know, and I have so many friends here, Gabe, my dear friend Bryna, new friends and old friends, Carol. and I have my team here, the lead member of my team, Clara Janis, who's just a joy to work with. She's a little hard on me. She starts every email now saying, "You must read this," in caps. It's just like unbelievable. And Peggy Keegan, who is working with the Volcker initiative on, increasing our footprint as this particular moment of great potential for reform proceeds. I mean, we always felt that divided government wasn't the curse for government reform. And there's actually an emergent consensus. We don't know where it'll go, whether it'll just stick with salmon. But there's an opportunity to do something here. And Peggy's been working with us, and I have a couple of other of my Volcker fellows, Shannon, I don't know where, Liz, Nick's downstairs, right? Yeah, so great group, and I know many of you. So anyway, my apologies for not mentioning all my faculty friends who are here, but I got former students, including Todd. Where's Todd? Who's no doubt going to pester me at some point. He's a social explorer, and I'll explain that. He's part of my little club of people who challenge the conventional wisdom, and what Todd does to me is challenge Paulette's wisdom, and that's really healthy and good, Amanda. At any rate, this is a wonderful event, honestly. I never have had a book party. When was that? Oh, that was for, which one? It's the oh, that was very nice. That was very nice, Bob. Thank you. Judge Katzman. So we'll keep this informal, and I'm not going to talk for very long. This is lovely, and I'm so thankful that Wagner did this for me. It's just lovely. I'm going to talk a little bit about driving social change, maybe 15 minutes or so. If you have any questions, we can talk about it. Chris Kovner is here. I've done some work with her on nursing, which is a public service profession, very important one as well. So I thought I'd start by telling you it's not a lack of respect or appreciation for this wonderful event that I'm wearing this Wile E. Coyote tie. Because this Wile E. Coyote tie has a story, and it's a story about social entrepreneurship, which we used to call innovation, right? So I wore this tie, have you heard this? I wore this tie in 1993 when the National Commission on State and Local Public Service presented its final report to Bill Clinton. The commission was chaired by former Mississippi Governor Bill Winter. Winter had lost the governorship, having been an early champion of civil rights, and we all assembled in the cabinet room in the White House to meet Bill Clinton. And everybody was dressed up, and I came in wearing a suit and this tie, and I got a lot of flack from commission members who were saying how disrespectful, a cartoon tie. And I said, I don't think so. I don't think so. And the president made his way through the line. There were 14 or 15 of us there, and I had been involved in writing the final report. And, shaking hands. And he got to me, and this is a true quote. He said, "That's a great tie, man." Because I already knew that, and we all knew that he was a tie horse, and there are certain details of his presidency that involved that particular attraction to ties. And, I could have said so many things at that moment. I could have said so many things. I'll trade you this tie for your tie, or could you sign it for me? I could have said a lot of things and just, been respectful. But I said, and this was during the time when we were all doing work on innovation, and Bryna was way out there doing this terrific work. I said, well, I wore it for a reason, Mr. President. And he said, well, what's that? And I said, well, so much of what we do in government is Wile E. Coyote-like thinking. We come up with an idea, and then we're out over the cliff in a cloud of smoke, and we fall to our death, and we come back, and then we paint a railroad tunnel on a rock, and we run into it, and the roadrunner escapes us, and then we buy a product from Acme, a catapult, and we pull the catapult, it flies over, and we find out that the roadrunner is on the board of directors, and I'm thinking, and he's looking at me like, I'm president, could I have him killed, kind of that kind of thing. And I think that kind of contrarian instinct influences my thinking about innovation today, which we often label as social entrepreneurship. And so my main point, and then I'm going to make 3 quick points, is that social entrepreneurship is a wonderful thing. It's an important thing. New combinations of ideas for reshaping how we think about urgent world problems, very important. We need to challenge the conventional wisdom about how we do things. And we need to change our minds about intractable problems. I think one of the things I admire about the general thrust of the field of social entrepreneurship is that there is no such thing as an intractable problem. They're all solvable. Now, if we muster enough courage and commitment, we can get it done. But that's a hubris, and that's an ambition, that's an audaciousness that's sometimes very disturbing and disruptive, and that's important. So I think that social entrepreneurship is a wonderful thing. You can call it social innovation, which is the term the president uses. He wanted to use social entrepreneurship in creating what's now known as the Social Innovation Fund, but nobody knows what social entrepreneurship is in the common lexicon of what governments might support. At any rate, I think it's a wonderful thing, and I support it fully, working with Gabe and the Reynolds Fellows. How many of you are Reynolds Fellows? Some of you, yeah? It's a great thing, and I admire the people engaged in it. My main point in this book is it ain't the only thing. I mean, it ain't the only thing. It's an important tool for achieving social change. You can call it what you want. You can call it social entrepreneurship. You can call it social innovation. It's important, but it's not the only path. And I think sometimes we get captured by the driver or the path to change. We want to be an advocate. We want to be a social explorer, as I call it. We want to engage in the delivery of services as stewards. We want to be social entrepreneurs. But the prior question has to be, where do we want to go? And then, how do we want to get there? Is social entrepreneurship the way to agitate the prevailing wisdom, to create a durable, sustainable change in the world? And you all may have different images of what the new prevailing wisdom should be. Should it be a more just world, a more equitable world, a more democratic world, a healthier world, a more educated world? But it's the destination that matters most. Let the destination be your guiding star, and then pick the tool that is most appropriate for getting there. And sometimes it's going to be social entrepreneurship. We need new ideas. Sometimes it's going to be delivering goods and services more effectively, where we already know what works. Sometimes it's going to be challenging the conventional wisdom. And other times it's going to be advocacy, and many times it's going to be a blend of all 4. So that's really one of the main points of this book. I love social entrepreneurship. I believe it exists. I've seen it. We argue a bit about what the definition is, right? You know, and that's healthy. And it's a fast-moving field. I'm just saying, hey, you know, choose the driver that gets you to where you want to go. Because you know the old saying, you know, if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. And that stands for social change as well. Now, I have to say, from a career standpoint, I consider myself a social explorer. And that's a role in social change. It's the people who are out there doing the research, doing the analysis, working the evaluation, studying what's happening. Chris, that's what you do. You know, you're working the issues to influence policy through knowledge. And that's what a lot of us in academia do. We sometimes don't claim it, and we sometimes don't write in clear terms, and sometimes we don't translate our work very well. But Brian, you're a social explorer. And Judge Katzman? No. Judge Katzman is a social steward. He is there to defend the faithful execution of the laws. You know? And sounds good to you? And you're doing a great job of it. Just a wonderful job. He's about as shy as I am, really. And we've been dear friends forever. Now, I like to describe the role of the social explorer as being contrarian. We have to challenge the conventional wisdom, whatever it is, and there is a conventional wisdom about social change. There's a conventional wisdom about social entrepreneurship. It's developed, and we're challenging it. And these definitions of social entrepreneurship are changing. Gabe's involved in part of that effort. Some of the others in this room are involved in part of that effort. This field is changing rapidly, largely because we're challenging prevailing definitions and prevailing strategies, right? I'm very fond of describing the social explorer as rather like a baby on an airplane. And I've used this with several others. I was talking to a friend at a major think tank and saying, well, we're all like babies on an airplane, aren't we? And his reaction was, I'd prefer not to use that particular analogy. But you've all been on an airplane when you've got an empty seat, a couple of empty seats next to you, have you? Right? And the door is closing, and you hear the pitter-patter of oncoming passengers, the last ones, and you're saying, and I'm looking at Brian because she's had more bad flight experiences than anybody I know. And Brian is sitting there, I'm sitting there saying, please don't sit by me, please don't sit by me. I've got these empty seats, please don't sit by me. And it's a mom or a dad, you know, with a baby. And at first glimpse, you say, how cuddly, how wonderful, you know, but babies are inherently dangerous and disruptive beings, and that's what the role of the social explorer is. And so some of what I'm going to say to you in the next few minutes is really about pressing that envelope, challenging the conventional wisdom, and it ain't a pleasant thing to do, is it? You know, because we get whacked around, and so we need a lot of kind of a thick skin and belief in ourselves, I suppose, or just a readiness to ignore the comments on columns. I mean, you just can't read them. They're so nasty. So here's my 3 points. Number one, social entrepreneurship is a wonderful thing. The definition of social entrepreneurship is changing rapidly, and we're starting to learn about different types of social entrepreneurship. And we should have gotten there perhaps sooner than we did. But the dominant model of social entrepreneurship has long been hero-centered. The 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, lonely garage entrepreneur. And that's a wonderful model and is especially popular in this country. When I talk about this in other countries, in Western Europe and so forth, they're like, what's the issue? We just don't buy that. But here, we've often had this heroic model of the entrepreneur, and I'm looking at Sonia and Erica at the back of the room from the reflective leadership tradition that, you know, you abandoned that image of that as the leadership model. It's one model of leadership some time ago. So I call that now type A, social entrepreneurship. And I think that works. And it does occur. And we ought to be enthralled and supportive and embracing of the individual heroes who are out there really working the issues by themselves, fighting the odds. Brian and I have had this conversation for many years that, you know, on innovation, the government innovation projects of the 80s and 90s that the Ford Foundation funded, that, you know, we have this image of the innovator as struggling mightily against the odds, against all obstacles to bring a new idea into fruition and then leave. And then the idea gets killed. You know, and I had my early forays into this field. It's not just recently that I've discovered this. I was, when I was in Minnesota, the coroner of innovation. I would go out and look at what you had done after it had died. You know, I do autopsies of one kind or another. So when David Osborne and Ted Gabler came out with their famous book, Reinventing Government, we did a study of all the examples from Minnesota. This was in 94, 95, between the moment that the book was issued in hardcover and the moment that it was issued in paper. Of the 67 or 68 examples in Reinventing Government, 30 were already dead, 12 were near dead, because they're easy to kill off. And that may be unique to government. I don't think so, but we studied that, and we know what some of the issues are around building infrastructure. That's one of the things the Reynolds program is working on, is different roles in support of social entrepreneurship, and the infrastructure builders is what you call them. And that's very important, the succession planning and the baton passing. So at any rate, we also see a type B social entrepreneurship emerging, which is based on what the Skoll Foundation calls catalytic collaboration. That oftentimes teams of people are much more effective in bringing new ideas to bear on existing problems. In fact, there's very good research emergent in the business community about who gets the patents for the new ideas. And guess what? Collaborative teams have a higher success rate in getting patents than the lone wolf innovator. Now, that's not to say there aren't lone wolf innovators who get, that there aren't patents going to lone wolf innovators. There always will be. It's just to say there's another way. And it's through collaboration, and it's through hard work in a team. And teams are difficult to manage. Boy, have I learned that. And Clara would say that I haven't really applied the lessons learned, have I, Clara? So, the lone wolf entrepreneur hits a bunch of home runs. The collaborative team hits a bunch of home runs. There's a higher probability that you're going to get a patent if you're coming out of a team than if you're operating as a solo player. There are lots of reasons for that. There also is a lower probability that you'll produce a failure. Now, again, that's not to say type A innovation and innovators, they're not going to succeed, because they do. But it's also to say there's a different path. And then, in Abu Dhabi earlier this year, I was teaching a bunch of freshmen there. Gosh, they were wonderful. And we started talking about type C, social entrepreneurship, because I sketch out type A and type B, but then we started to say, well, is there a type C? And it's a crowdsource kind of model, spontaneous, leaderless combustion. And we were looking at Tunisia at that point and saying, well, who was responsible for that? Who's the social entrepreneur? Who's the 24/7 lone wolf? Well, it wasn't like that. And then we have these kind of leaderless, emergent efforts that, it's just hard to pin down. And crowdsourcing is a possible form of social entrepreneurship. Now, you might say, well, it might have been a handful of people who came together and started tweeting, but maybe not. So, and there might be a type D and there might be a type F. And the point is that you can get there a number of ways to a new combination of ideas, right? You can do it by groping along. And I quote Bryna at some length because, actually when I run out of things to write, there's some things I took from her that I didn't cite, but she's such a good friend, she won't take umbrage. Second point is that there are other paths to social change. And I talk about social stewardship. It's like this notion is out there that existing organizations are so tired, so moribund, so rule-bound, that they cannot, for the life of them, come up with a new combination of ideas for delivering services. That's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. All of us in this room know of organizations that are able to bring new ideas from within their midst. Now, it's not easy. You're often fighting within your own organization, fighting against it. Existing organizations have advantages in producing new combinations of ideas, i.e. resources. If they get behind a new idea, they can propel it forward fast, especially if they're big. They have serious obstacles. Just as new organizations, the shiny new thing that we like to celebrate, like, okay, I've got to invent my own nonprofit. I've got to have a nonprofit. And it's got to be new, and it's got to be, young, and that's the only way to get a new combination of ideas. It's not true. New organizations have significant advantages, relatively flat, fast, agile, if you will, very adaptive, but they also have weaknesses. Our research on this, in this book that I wrote a few years ago, The Search for Social Entrepreneurship, shows that small, new, socially entrepreneurial organizations have relatively weak governance systems. They're very exposed on governance issues. They're also relatively weak in terms of infrastructure. Hence, this work that Gabe is doing on infrastructure building is very important. So, you've got that going on. So there's this kind of role for social entrepreneurs. There's a role for social stewards. Their job is not just to protect and deliver, but to also fine-tune and invent. And they do so. And we ought to give them credit for doing so. They do come up with new combinations of ideas. They do bring new energy to bear. Most important, and I think we're finding this out right now, is that breakthroughs of the past are often very easy to unravel, aren't they? So you sit there and you say, well, gee, we fought that battle over pro-choice, right? That's all done. We took care of that, right? But in H.R. 1, if you care about this issue, the House bill, Planned Parenthood defunded. There's H.R. 3, which would restrict access to abortion rights, et cetera, et cetera. I would argue that over and over again, we see examples of past breakthroughs where people have bled and worked hard to achieve change that we allow to atrophy through neglect and complacency. That's a role for social stewards as well, to protect what we already have, where we've already made breakthroughs. And that's also a role for social entrepreneurs. Third role is the social explorer, and I've already described that in a little bit. The people who are doing the work, they got to get better about translating their work. But it's an important role. And then social advocacy. Lots of social advocates out there. And actually in this book, I described the breakthrough cycle, sort of a pattern, a map of how ideas actually move from beginning to end, through the breakthrough, through the disruption, through the actual enactment, in quotes. I'm not talking about just passing a law, a change in mindsets, a change in social norms, through defending them. It's so interesting. And I'll quickly move to the third point, but we had this event that Gabe was at over at the Stern School, and I was saying, rather provocatively, I guess, that it could be that business and social entrepreneurship are alike, all in unimportant ways. Now, that's probably not true. You're kind of thinking, I'm sure, about Graham Allison's famous piece on government and business being alike, all in unimportant ways. I think there are similarities, but you have to know that when business entrepreneurship occurs, the impact is persistent and lasting. You don't go back. Every time I talk about this example, I say, well, we don't have vinyl records anymore, and then I think of you, Bob, Judge, and your unbelievable collection, or me, we've all got records from my generation. We just don't have needles. That's the problem. You can't get them. So it's vintage. So in business entrepreneurship, the new idea comes along. It creates a wave of creative destruction, knocks out the prevailing wisdom, creates a new market. The old is gone for good. In social entrepreneurship and social change more generally, that old prevailing wisdom is always around. It's always around, looking for a new election, maybe looking for an opportunity to reassert itself, fighting back. It's always going to be a contest, isn't it? So we go back and forth. We thought we had campaign finance resolved. That had nothing to do with you. The Citizens United, So we thought it was done in 2003. The law had been passed, and then in cometh the new court, and the old prevailing wisdom about campaign finance comes back. And I was reminded of that when the former governor of Alaska started talking about nullification of the health care bill. Didn't the federal courts rule against nullification? When was that, Judge? 1827, was it? I think it was 1827. But it comes back. I'm just saying it comes back. So we have to be careful about defending what's already come, because the old prevailing wisdom in social change is always out there waiting for a comeback. Third point, last point. The most important thing I've learned from all of this is the role of commitment to change in sustaining forward motion. we don't talk about it very much. And what I'm talking about here is the calling to make a difference and the perseverance needed to sustain your work through the enormous challenges that you will face in breaking through. And so this is a message for anybody in this room who wants to make a difference in this world. It's just going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. How long have I been working on trying to get reform in the presidential appointments process? 25 years. Reform in government? Bryna, how long have we been working on that? 20 years. And it may not happen. I've been trying to raise judicial salaries for, 10 years, and I haven't been able to do a thing. Paul Volcker has too. So you can't do this work without a deep and abiding commitment to sustaining your effort, because you will be knocked down, and you will have moments of despair, and you will have moments of great trial and great challenge. You will find great joy from this work, and you will find great frustration. So what I've learned as I've gone forward in talking more and more deeply with change agents in these 4 roles that I described is that at the core of social change is what we might describe as a calling, a basic purpose that calls us to engage. And so I sometimes have these conversations with people who are engaged in social change. I say, well, why are you here? I've asked you that 1,000 times now. Why are you here? And they say, well, I'm here to change the world. And why do you want to change the world? Well, because I grew up, where's Shannon? Is Shannon still here? Shannon came to my class yesterday, and she's so wonderful. You know, she grew up on a, I'm not telling tales out of school, Robin. Grew up on a dairy farm. Her parents instilled in her a deep commitment to making a difference. Yes, but what is it that calls you to action, and what is it that holds you in action and allows you to persevere? And we don't talk much about it, do we? We talk about the skills you need, we talk about the tactics you need, we talk about the financial management systems you need, we talk about everything but your core belief, your calling. And if there's one thing that I have learned over the last 20 years of studying this, and you've seen it too, that there is something that brings us into this and holds us, and it's bigger than the paycheck, you know, and it's bigger than the hope for profit. There's something that calls us to address a basic injustice in this world. And we may define injustice in many different ways, but there is this issue of calling and purpose. And it's something I want to work on. And I got to tell you, there's a lot to learn about it in neurobiology, in sociology, in clinical social work, issues surrounding resilience, post-trauma, suffering, what happens to us that brings us to this like absolute unyielding demand to change the world. We may not talk about it very much, but it's there. And if you have a sit down with somebody engaged in this effort and you talk about it, you eventually find it. I have had hundreds of conversations with change agents over the years. Eventually you get there. But you know what happens? They say, can I go off the record for a minute? And then they start talking about sort of existential issues. Why they think they are here in this world at this particular time. So we're all off the record. And I think it's time, as part of conversations about driving social change, to talk about how we keep going and why we're called to this work. And I'm very excited about that particular work for the future. Now, did I go on? What?
Next book.
The next project, and we are working on it right now, is called the Purpose and Perseverance Project. But you know what? It's a darn hard project. And I'm not getting a lot of how can we help you calls about it. You know, so I have to go out and talk to funders and remind them of their purpose, which is to support social explorers like me, right? Anyway, I'm so grateful to have you here. I'm so grateful for your respect and affection, and I hope I can continue to do the right thing, and it's my purpose to stay out here and keep grinding away on it. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Couple, anybody have a question? Yes?
Hi, my name is Sophia Mead and I'm an undergraduate student. I really appreciated your comment about purpose and calling because that's what motivates me to do what I want to do. But I'm in an advanced social entrepreneurship class right now, and they stress very much about financial kind of backbone. And you know, that it's great you want to do something, but you need to think of profitable ways to do it. And I wanted to know maybe where you can join those two things, or if there's a place where you can, like a harmonious kind of balance, or does passion override everything? You know?
Well, it's that old, you know, you can use the metaphor of the heart and the head. That successful change involves a hard head and a soft heart and blah, 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 blah. Not to denigrate the argument. Look, you got to be disciplined. I mean, rigor and discipline is one of the core values, I think, of perseverance. You know, honesty with yourself, with your organization about what you're doing and how you're doing it. I mean, too many people engaged in social change think they've got the idea and it's unalterable. They don't care about measurement. That's one of the weaknesses that we find in the new entrepreneurial startup, is that they're so convinced they've got the next Snuggie, you know, that they can't be persuaded otherwise. No research and development, no measurement. Financial management in the new startups that we studied, not very good. Not very good at all. Accountability systems, not very good. So if you're going to challenge the prevailing wisdom, what's going to happen? It's going to challenge you back. That's how it stays the prevailing wisdom. You can call it the social equilibrium if you want to be businesslike. You know, you can call it the prevailing wisdom or the status quo, but you know how the status quo works? I mean, if you're weak in your management systems, your structure, how you're operating, you're unethical, corrupt, whatever, you're going to get caught and you're going to be brought down, because that's how you can attack a change effort. So you've got to be disciplined. You've got to know these things. But you cannot forget why you're doing it. You are not serving your management systems. Those systems are serving you. And they got to be good, and they've got to be first rate. But you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to get up in the morning and ask yourself why you're here. Who do you serve? You know, how are you going to know you're successful if you're not? How are you going to stay healthy? One of the most painful stories that I've heard and that I've been, you know, involved with has been the founding director of a terrific, high-impact organization for preventing disease in less developed countries. But her organization wore her out. She got physically and emotionally drained. She had to leave. And we could talk around this room, those of us who have been out in the world, right? We can talk about these great change agents who get blown out after 2 or 3 years. They can't remember why they started. They don't renew. They don't take care of themselves. I had this great conversation at the Great Bay Foundation, I guess 3 years ago, with a bunch of change makers, if you want to call them that. And I said, you know, if there's anybody in this room who has unused vacation time, you're doing the wrong thing. And my God, these people were like, how dare you? You know, that's a sign of our self-worth that we don't have vacation. We never take vacation, you know? And I'm like, wow, you know, and what are they going to do when you're worn out and you leave? Well, your change idea is just going to collapse. You know, you're not so important that you can't take care of yourself. It's a weird kind of phenomenon in this heroic model, type A social entrepreneurship, that we've got to kill ourselves in order to succeed. So you got to marry these things. You know, you got to take a walk in the woods every once in a while. You got to go and deal with deeper issues of faith and connectedness. People do it in many different ways. There's some research on the role of meditation in steadying the drive for social change. You might be surprised about that. Now, there's also some research on yoga. Since I can't do it, I'm not interested in that particular research. Take care of yourself, but be disciplined. So it's a simultaneous. You know, be honest, purposed, disciplined. You know, have a good dose of faith. You know, so there is a harmonization, and that's our job. You know, who are teaching and the people teaching in this field and doing research in the field to show that it matters. Because right now we take it as a given. Oh, you're wonderful. You must have a sense of purpose, and we don't have to worry about that. You'll take care of yourself. You know, so we got to work harder at it, right? Yeah. So, any other questions? Not a one? I could bloviate more, as you know. Yes.
Well, my first question is, when did you last take a vacation? I'll move on.
Well, if you consider 3 weeks in Abu Dhabi as a vacation,
No.
you know, no. Well, and you just got back from Abu Dhabi, you know, so that's a hell of a question, Erica, and I really appreciate that you asked that.
That wasn't my real question. My real question is, so I haven't read the book, so I apologize, but it sounds like you make a distinction between social entrepreneurs and social advocates.
Yes.
And I'm wondering why, because I can imagine that advocacy work is very entrepreneurial. You can do it in a very entrepreneurial way or in a less entrepreneurial way. So I'm just curious.
I think that what I'm trying to say is there are 4 different roles, 4 different drivers. So you often find them blended. You frequently find them in the issue networks that we build around change, like hunger, for example. So you bring in your advocates, you bring in your lobbyists, you bring in your pollsters, and you have a bunch of different nodes. So you're combining different capacities in an alliance and submerging self and organization for the goal. I just think it's really important to make clear that there are other ways. And I'll tell you, there's something that just drives me to great frustration in the social entrepreneurship community. It's not true of our programs, but there is a distinctiveness trap that the field has fallen into. We are not social service providers, because social service providers do nothing. And I've read some stuff that, and the people who write about this, they always honor the social service agencies. They say they're doing honorable work, they're feeding people, but they're not changing the world. You know, and so you set them aside. We're not social service providers. And then they say, and we're not researchers. In fact, there's almost please don't tell us anything researchy. Please don't. And there is some argument, and I think it's passing, that we're not social advocates. And I will tell you, Erica, if you read some of the dominant work in the social entrepreneurship field and you do word searches, you will not find the word power or politics in much of the literature. I mean, there was a famous article written after I wrote an article about an inclusive definition. It was they were arguing we got to keep the tent small. We got to tell people what we're not, otherwise there'll be lots of people who want the money, right? And if you search that particular article, the word power is never used, politics is never used. Now, how can you have social change without at least considering the possibility that power is involved? But we're sometimes so nice that we don't want to use it. In the nonprofit sector, we're just so nice, we just don't want to use it. So I'm reacting to that issue that this kind of distinctiveness desire for distinctiveness to set the social entrepreneur over here and raise her up. And then everybody else is in a support role. Yeah, we need some advocates, so we'll go out and get them. But I'm particularly concerned as I go out and talk to the settlement house community and other social service agencies, legacy organizations as they're sometimes called, you know, big, old, antiquated, they've been around 150,000 years, you know, and they're denigrated in part of this conversation. Like they don't do anything innovative or, you know, I mean, there's a famous passage where it said they never get out of their silo. They never are able to break free. So they're off limits. And I just find that so not useful, especially in this particular period of time. I mean, we need everybody to engage. We need to be ecumenical. But now I'm a big tent person. I get hammered on that all the time. And I'm too, you know, I used to be 6'5", you know, and I've been hammered on it over and over again. You can see I get really passionate about this. Can I just end with one last story and then we'll have some wine? I gave this speech at the Feeding America conference last year, probably 3,000 people. I mean, that's unbelievable, really, to get up. I mean, you just have to close your eyes, really. But some people here have seen that speech. It's on YouTube, and I have 400 hits, you know, over 2 years. At any rate, I gave my speech, and at the end of the speech, we went to Q&A. This is Feeding America, $3 billion. We got Robin here from City Harvest. How many tons of food are you doing this year?
28 billion pounds.
I mean, I love City Harvest. I've even collected some food for you. I love it.
Because I called you.
Yeah, but, you know, what a pleasure it was to do it. Carry 50 pounds of tomatoes. You know, that's really a task. At any rate, at the end of this conversation, and food rescue, food bankers, they get this question all the time. Somebody stands up and says, what do we say to people who say we enable hunger? Now, you think of that at the height of the recession, you know, that somebody's going into a food bank or food rescue operation and saying, why, you guys are just enabling hunger. I mean, what's that about? You know, so I didn't have a quick answer. The best I could come up with was to tell anybody who asks you that to go 3 days without food and come back and ask the question again. You know, so it's a combination of different paths to get this done. I mean, we can't ignore the people who are currently in need as we struggle with solving these very difficult problems. It's going to take time. And I get pretty exercised about it, don't I? Yes. One last question.
You referred to the article that defined it as a narrower tent, and I'm guessing that's the Roger Martin school definition of it.
Could be, yeah.
But the other thing they didn't talk about power, they didn't talk about politics, but I don't think they really dove into the motivations of social entrepreneurs and the sort of difference between internal and external motivations. And the traditional conversation I've seen in the social sector is that it's all internal because we want to, quote unquote, save the world. Whereas entrepreneurs and politicians were happy celebrating the less noble motivations that sometimes, you know, you see this in social, the Social Network, the movie about Facebook. So the question I want to ask is, how do you, when you have these conversations with about the importance of perseverance, how do you tease out beyond the noble motivations into some of the more egotistical motivations that I think reside in all of us?
Well, I mean, there's this article in the New York Times yesterday about all the people flocking to the public service because it's a really nice destination when there are no destinations other than government. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And my class, my students and I were struggling with that. You know, do you have to be motivated by the public good or the great, you know, that great purpose? Or is it okay to worry about your paycheck? And I think it's a blend of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Personally, I want to hire somebody who's motivated first and foremost by the desire to make a difference. But I'm not willing to sacrifice technical ability to get there. You know, I want smart people. I want them to be motivated. by this passion because it's going to be hard, but I don't think we have to take a vow of poverty. At the same time, I don't think, $1 million salary is probably the right motivation or kind of a foolish goal, perhaps. I mean, I like to say that, there's you're not going to get profit, you're not going to get glory, you're not going to get an award right away. Those things may follow, but you have to be, this perseverance is not going to be well grounded in durable extrinsics, I think. But we can have a debate about it. You know what I mean? I just like, you don't have to take a vow of poverty. We need to deal with debt, this particular problem in the nonprofit sector where many people say, gee, I want to go to the nonprofit sector because I want to suffer. And that kind of desire for the virtue involved in not having a decent paycheck or pension or whatever. I think it's a blend, but I like to see this passion right out there, and then you have to drill down in the conversation. Now, I've had conversations with social entrepreneurs, and we'll start out, and I'll just say, why does this company exist? You're making solar panels. Well, we want profit, we got this, we want growth, da, 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 da. And I say, well, do you want to reduce the carbon footprint? Is that part of your goal? Oh, yeah. And so sometimes it's like there and it's not there. Are they not doing a good thing? I wouldn't say that, but I think if you're engrossed in this effort for long-term change, you're going to need some source of energy beyond the profitability. I mean, it's nice to have money. But that's not what's motivating you, Judge Katzman. It's this deep belief in executing the laws properly. So it's a great question, and I hope to explore it in more detail. Right? Anyway, I think that should be our last question. We can get some time.